Welcome, everyone. My name is Paige, and you are here as part of Deschutes Public Library's virtual programming. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Cooper. He is the Central Oregon Writers Guild president, and he is going to introduce our panelists and our reader for tonight.
All right, thank you, Paige, and thanks, Paige, and thanks Deschutes Public Libraries programs. Paige is our event manager at the local library, and she's sponsoring this. The library is actually putting this on, as they will be doing with most of our events this year. Super excited to have this group tonight. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I'm going to let Mary Krakow, who is our featured reader coordinator, one of our board members, run the show. She's going to do two special things tonight. She's going to introduce our featured reader, and she's also going to facilitate the conversation. So I'm going to just do a quick screen share with you to show you our Central Oregon Writers Guild page, just to remind everyone what's going on and what's coming up. This is the landing page of the Central Oregon Writers Guild website, and it talks about meeting and events. And look, here's where we are tonight. If you click on these names here, you will be able to go to these people's websites, and you'll be able to find out more about them and where to get their books. In April, we've got Ellen Waterston, who's going to speak to us. That's a month from now. In May, we have a publishing panel. We're going to do a panel similar to what we have going tonight, but with publishers, self-publishers, and that should be pretty interesting. And then Kim Cooper-Feindling is going to do a workshop, and there are a limited number of spaces for the workshop. So on our website, you can RSVP for that workshop. Members are $10, non-members are $25. We sold out on our last workshop. So if it's something that you're interested in and you have that time free, I'd recommend doing that as soon as possible. Also on our website, we list all the writing related events that we know of in Central Oregon. So Shut Up and Write is a meetup thing that happens Mondays and Fridays, Monday through Friday, 6:45 to 8:45 a.m., Tuesdays and Wednesdays, 1:30 to 3, Thursdays, 2 to 4. This is still going on online. It's a great little writing community event. Get online, talk to some writers, and then do some quiet writing. It helps certainly keep me accountable to my writing. Other events, we're here again with this Central Oregon Writers Guild monthly workshop. My wife is in the other room running this poetry workshop as we speak. There's a virtual poetry slam through the library. That's tomorrow. That'll be really cool. Then some events at COCC, self-publishing book cover design. I believe that's Tamara, who's listening to us as we speak right now. Our writing salon from Blank Pages, some author readings, Books in Common online events. Leva Moss is doing a manuscript to publish book through the library, and the library also has a writing group for teens. We'll try and keep this updated every month, usually around the 25th or so. I put the things that are on for the next month. And I will be adding on this the Central Oregon Book Project, which is being overseen by Kimberly Bowker. She's about to be taking submissions for that. And Kim is with us here on the panel. And Kimberly is a local freelance journalist. And her job in high school, she worked at Paulina Springs Books in Sisters. She went to college in Vermont, returned to Bend to work in the business section at the Bulletin. She got her master's in literary fiction, nonfiction from the University of Oregon, and currently works at a local school and continues to freelance for various regional and national publications. She is grateful to honor our life and land here in Central Oregon, and she's honoring that through her Central Oregon Book Project. And I'm going to pass it over to Kimberly and let her tell us all about it.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Thank you all for having me tonight, and it's wonderful to be here with you. As Mike mentioned, my name's Kimberly Bowker, and I am a local freelance writer, and I am currently compiling a an anthology called Central Oregon Book Project. And I'm here to just share a little bit about it, as we are going to be opening up submissions for consideration. And that time period is going to be from March 21st through May 31st. So the book will be a collection of stories from the community about Central Oregon. It was funded through a Kickstarter campaign this last fall, so it was funded by the community. And the books will be distributed for free after it's published in public spaces, such as neighborhood libraries and little free libraries. They'll go wherever they end up going, and then it'll also be available online for purchase too. So the idea for this book came about from a writing workshop I did with Lionel George, and she is a journalist in LA, and it was a workshop about place. And for a long time, I'd been writing and exploring this idea of how do we honor Central Oregon and how do we consciously create this community here. And I was writing, and it finally in this workshop, it came to me that it's not all about me and my voice, it's about us and how we want to move forward and honor the past and create the future. And so the book it's going to be a small book, kind of just like a little small book. And it's going to be short pieces as well. So it'll be a maximum of 250 words for each piece. They do need to be true, which just means no fictionalized events and no fictionalized characters. And you can submit in the categories, 3 different categories. You can submit in history or roots. So history, the second one is gratitude, and the third one is community. There's a 4th category you can also submit. It's called Our Hopes, which is basically a sentence of what you or we hope for the future for Central Oregon. So again, submissions will be open from March 21st to May 31st. You'll be notified if the piece has been selected to be published in the fall, probably in September. There will be more information on the website on March 21st. It's not quite up yet, but it will be up there, centraloregonbookproject.com. And you can email me anytime with questions at centraloregonbookproject@gmail.com. So thank you all. I cannot wait to read your stories and your words, and thank you for everything that you do in the world.
Thank you, Kimberly. So when you are ready to take submissions, let me know, and I'll put that information on our website, on the Central Oregon Writers Guild website. So that'll be in the events, and we'll have the link to your submissions, the details, that all that information. So since we're all a bunch of writers, this is a great opportunity, and really appreciate it, and appreciate all the work that you've put into it, Kimberly. All right. So without further ado, let's introduce our very own Mary Krakow. Mary is a board member at Central Oregon Writers Guild. She is a wonderful person. She is one of my writing buddies that I miss seeing since pandemic. We used to go do the quiet writing at the library. She's a writing nerd. She was a teacher. Her favorite part of the school day was creative writing, and she liked to sit and chew on her pencil until an idea hit her, and then she was off like a shot, scribbling scenes as fast as she could. And I've seen her do that in workshops. She's a great free writer. She has a website called findyourwritingnerd.com, and you can find that on our website as well. So Mary is going to take over for the rest of the show. She's going to introduce our featured writer and then run the panels. And Mary, it's all you.
Well, thank you, Michael. Okay, so welcome everybody. First, I'm going to introduce our featured reader. We do a featured reader each month. And this month we have the brave Matthew Friday. He just joined Central Oregon Writers Guild, and he said, I'd like to do a reading. When can I do that? And I said, well, how about next month? So let me introduce you to Matthew. Matthew Friday is a British writer, elementary school teacher, and storyteller for children. He immigrated to the US during the pandemic. Imagine that. He and his American wife have taught in different countries and were last based in beautiful Switzerland, teaching in an American school. Matthew's poems have been published in many print and online journals around the world. He creates and delivers workshops to help teachers become storytellers and gain skills teaching poetry to children. So I'd like to introduce you to Matthew Friday. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mary. And thanks, Mike and Paige, for helping facilitate this as well, to give this opportunity for me to share some of my poems. So in the next few minutes, I'd like to read some of my more recently published poems. You'll notice that there's kind of a Switzerland flavor to some of them. And if there's any specific Swiss references, I'll just quickly mention that beforehand. Okay, the first poem is not Swiss at all. It was written in Portland. It's called The Crow and the Douglas Fir. Crow born in the Douglas fir, croaking, voice like cracking bark, a black hole happening. In moments the tree cannot measure. Its ringed heart beats in decades. Now flying between bare trees, a black photon appearing when observed, voice like creaking time, disappearing back into potential. My next poem is called The Dipper. I don't know if you have this type of bird here. We have it in Europe. It's a little bird of the river that lives an aquatic life, and it's seen often on rocks, and it will swim down into the water and hunt for larvae. It's called The Dipper. And it mentions a French-Swiss town called Morgine. The Dipper. I caught you scuttling off your rock in the creek that slips behind Morgine's. The frothy white wave of your breast gave you away. For a moment you perched, bobbing your territory, and then returned to silence, broken by a man crossing the creek and spitting into the water. This next poem is called I Feel Jazz. I feel jazz. Second lockdown looming, a cocktail of anxiety and wine swirling in my soul. No one knows. The future is just scat. I turn to jazz again. Miles, you're there for me, mimicking the universe with the chaos that can coalesce into occasional meaning and melody, then leap apart again. When I listen to you, I am altered, reassured, at peace. I dance around the empty apartment, spilling myself in arms and heart, accepting what chaos creates. Okay. My next poem, it featured in a town called Interlaken in the center of Switzerland, kind of a gateway to all the mountains and those activities. This is called Summer Storm over Interlaken. I watched the storm arrive through the rented apartment window, streaming blackness laced with cuts of white cloth. At the craft beer brew bar on the corner, stags raised their horns and bellowed at every stab of thunder. In the street outside, dogs scurried and barked, kicking cans and howling. A tomcat snuck over the apartment walls and stood in our balcony, smoking, looking up and wincing. I cuddled up against my wife, glad to have the wall and window between us and the angry world. Then the rain fell in such furious sheets that it quieted the stags, sent the dog scurrying away, made the cat leap back to its boundary. We threw open and welcomed the water and the relief of all things made equal. This next poem is called The Bats. 8:30 p.m. The sun is an orange memory in the west. The east pastels the rising evening. The last dusk choir is over, and the trees silent with settling singers. Village lights jewel mountain chests. The evening star winking permission. This is the in-between time, claimed by the bats coming out to scout space, the birds shivering back onto branches. From under darkly crested stone pines, the bat shoots out, casting electric lines, down which they zag and twist to snag an invisible meal. Suddenly another blur of dark matter makes curves, winking. Wings flapping as fast as this evening, dips into a softly dark night. The eye of Venus, fluttering, as four of them fill up the space, the blue leaking to black. And my last poem for the moment is called The Candle. Start with the flame, that beautiful spark of entropy proving itself, compounds combusting, changing solid wax to molten rivers that mourn, cool and harden, heaping new forms on old, recreating but reducing, all the while less and less, structured energy to heat loss. As your candle burns up, taking years, if you are lucky enough to deny the second law, the lengthening yellow hand waves shadows on the white wall, while shadows that grow confident as the night darkens softly dim. All that fading, dissembling, can be cheated a while, the brief breath of a poem. And with that, thank you very much. Thanks everyone for listening. I appreciate the audience and thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay, some wonderful images there. Okay, so the format that I'm envisioning for this evening is I will introduce each author individually, and then I'll give you some time to say whatever it is you would like to say, if you feel there's something we need to hear and so forth. So each one of you will have that opportunity. And then after all of you have had that opportunity, then I have some prepared questions to ask. And after that, we'll open it up to the membership and guests to ask questions. Okay, so once again, thank you all for coming to this panel because we're really excited to have you here. I'm going to start with Roseanne. Before I read her bio here, I don't know if you remember, Roseanne, but I met you years ago at a Silver Falls conference, and you really impressed me with your generosity. So I'm really excited to have you on this panel tonight. Okay, Roseanne Perry is the author of 7 award-winning middle grade novels, including the newly released A Whale of the Wild and the New York Times bestseller, A Wolf Called Wander, which is published in 11 languages. Roseanne is a part-time bookseller at legendary Portland independent bookstore, Annie Bloom's. She lives with her family in an old farmhouse in Portland, Oregon, and writes in a treehouse in her backyard. So, what else can you tell us, Roseanne? Oh, Roseanne, you need to unmute.
The thing that I wanted to say the most, actually talking to a group of writers who are adults, most of my day talking to writers who are children, but like a lot of writers, I had a period in my writing career in which I could not sell money. I'm telling you, I continued to write, and I didn't have any success at all, even though I had already had successfully published books. And but I stuck with it. I kept with the writing, and I wrote something completely different that was out of the vein of what I had written before, but was really fun and interesting to me. And my agent liked it, and we sent it to literally every publisher in the United States, I think some 42 of them, all of whom said, this is great writing, but we could not possibly publish this. It was turned down by every publisher in the United States. And so we had a conversation about whether to stick with it or not. And she said, let's try other English language publishers in the world. So we tried Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and England. And we found a British publisher who loved it. That is the book that became A Wolf Called Wander and was on the New York Times bestseller list for almost a year, right? And that was preceded by 7 years in which I did not sell anything. So those kind of ups and downs, I gotta say, I can't think of any author that I know, and I've met a few, who have not had that sort of a thing in their career. It's a very unpredictable ride, but success can come to anyone. You don't have to have a particular in or a secret handshake or any of those things. You just have to keep trying, really. So.
Well, thank you, Roseanne. I was really counting on that secret handshake, but.
Bummer, sorry.
Okay. Okay. So next on our panel, we have Sydney Swanson. She writes unforgettable contemporary characters who are genuinely shocked to find themselves thrown into perilous or sci-fi situations. Sydney's complex plotting and stick-with-you characters have resulted in a Kirkus Review's annual Best of Young Adult Teen and an SCBWI Spark Honor book. Sydney can be found asking her husband, Kat's kids, and anyone else who will listen why it rains so much in Oregon's Willamette Valley. So welcome, Sydney. Don't forget to unmute yourself and tell us something more.
Okay. So yeah, I live in Eugene. The rain makes me absolutely crazy. But as with so many things, I've always said it's my writing that keeps me sane. And I kind of feel like 2020 was the test case for that for me. It was a time where even though my kids live close by, I couldn't see them. I've got, two of them are in medical careers, so there's like no way they're risking it. And, likewise, just like everybody else, lots of isolation, lots of me time, which I always thought I loved. I am definitely somebody who recharges by herself. I love traveling by myself, the whole 9 yards. But in 2020, I really, I found that the writing mattered to me just more than ever. That opportunity, and this will sound, well, it'll either sound normal or very strange depending on you, but my characters and their lives and the things that they were wrestling with, it got me through. Having there's some kind of social relationship there with these characters that, of course, I know are imaginary. I know they're not real, but there was something there that has been very sustaining. So there you go.
Thank you. I think we can all relate to that isolation piece and thinking that that's what you really like until you're forced to live it, right? Okay, our next panelist is Amber Kaiser, also somebody I have met and has been very generous with her time and talents. Amber J. Kaiser, am I saying that right, Amber? It's Kaiser, right? Okay. Amber J. Kaiser is a former ballerina and evolutionary biologist who writes both fiction and nonfiction for tweens and teens. She's the author of 14 books for teens and tweens. Her young adult novels include Point Claw and The Way Back from Broken, a finalist for the Oregon Book Award. She is the co-author with Kiersey Burkhart of the middle grade series Quartz Creek Ranch. She also writes nonfiction books for adults. Amber lives on the dry side of Oregon, here in Central Oregon, with her husband, 2 kids, 4 chickens, and a dog who looks like a Muppet. And with that, I'm going to introduce you to Amber, and don't forget to unmute and tell us something great.
Thank you, Mary. It was so nice to see your face on the screen. I feel like I want to just reach out through the screen and hug all my writer friends. I miss you all so much. So yeah, I was thinking about what Roseanne had to say. There was a period of time when I was writing full-time. I had multiple books under contract at the same time, and it was awesome, right? I mean, I was super excited about all those projects. But after the last book I wrote, which is a nonfiction title about rape culture and the Me Too movement called No More Excuses, Dismantling Rape Culture. That book was devastating for me to write. It was really hard on my mental health. It was really hard for a lot of reasons. And then there were some complications around publication, because publishing is an infuriating world. That meant it didn't reach quite as wide an audience as I had hoped to. And so then that was really hard, right? To have spent all these many months and all of this mental capacity to write this book that was not finding its audience in the way I wanted it to. And I was tired and burnt out and frustrated at working this hard. And so I did the logical thing. I got a day job. I took a day job after writing full-time for a long, long time, and intentionally sort of pulled back from my writing community. I stopped doing events. This is the first event I've done in a long time, to be perfectly honest. And tried to really intentionally find my way back to some kind of joy in the writing process. And for me, that was both painful, but it had to be done. I mean, I had to find a way that writing was something that filled me instead of sucked me dry again. And so, interestingly, when I did all of these things, when I sort of stepped back from the writing world, all of a sudden I had all these ideas and all this excitement and a day job, so I had no time to do them. But, I'm still sort of trying to find that balance now. But I can say with complete honesty that I am really loving writing again after going through a period of time when it just felt like a grind. So I think that is one of the things about becoming a published author, is that it changes the process. And that is sometimes surprising.
Well, thank you. Interesting. We all hope to be published authors someday, but that's what we have to look forward to, right? Okay. Our final panelist is Kat Winters. Kat Winters is a critically acclaimed, award-winning author of 5 novels for teens: In the Shadow of Blackbirds, The Cure for Dreaming, The Steep and Thorny Way, Odd and True, and The Raven's Tale. She has been named a Morris Award finalist, a Bram Stoker Award nominee, and an Oregon Spirit Book Award winner. She is also the author of 2 novels for adults and contributed to the young adult horror anthology, Slasher Girls and Monster Boys. She lives in a suburb outside of Portland, Oregon, surrounded by forests that offer ample inspiration for her gothic, atmospheric tales. So welcome, Kat, and don't forget to unmute.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm Kat Winters, and that suburb that was mentioned in my biography there is Hillsboro, Oregon, up by the Portland area. I can relate to pretty much everything Roseanne, Amber, and Sydney just said. I've been through pretty much almost every single experience they were discussing. I had a very long road to publication just to get my first book published. And I might talk a little bit more about that as we get into some of the questions. Adult fiction for a really long time, actually about two decades worth of trying to write adult fiction and trying to get published in adult fiction before I switched to writing young adult fiction. Been very busy with that over the past decade. At this point, I've taken a little break from young adult fiction. For me personally, I found that writing novels during the pandemic has been very, very challenging. So if anyone is going through that experience and finding writing to be hard right now, even though there theoretically should be enough time to write, I can attest that is normal. And I've talked to a lot of other authors that have really struggled with it too. Before the pandemic hit, I had been starting to move into the direction of writing for younger children. And I really kind of just explored that more this past year. And I keep thinking in my head, I should be writing another novel. It's time. And I've been really telling myself it's okay if that's not what your brain is wanting to do right now. Go towards something that makes you happy. Like what Amber was talking about, you need to find the joy when you're writing. And that's been a really big lesson for me this past year, and throughout my whole writing career is to learn to not be so hard on ourselves as writers, and to really look for what makes you happy. Like finding the passion in writing, I feel, is always a big key in moving forward.
Okay, thank you. So now we're going to dive into the questions. So I hadn't thought too much about how I'm going to do this. Maybe I'll just start by asking one person. Amber, you start with A, so I think I'm going to start with you, and then you can pass it to the next person. So, and then, if you guys want to like open your mics and just discuss among yourselves, I'm okay with that too. All right, so the first question is, tell us your genre and what defines it. And the second part is, how does writing for your age group differ from other kinds of writing? So Amber, we're going to start with you.
So I write nonfiction that is usually some kind of a social history. So how do economics, sociology, culture, art, politics, how do those things interact with each other around a topic? So like my most recent book was on rape culture, but I also wrote a book on the history of marriage that sort of talked about those things. So that's my nonfiction, which is pretty much all for the YA audience. And then for my fiction, I write, I have a series that's middle grade realistic fiction, but mostly I write YA that is realistic fiction, sometimes sort of swerving into speculative fiction a little bit. So with some sort of maybe magical realism elements to my YA fiction. I think, so thinking about who I'm writing for, I think a lot about audience. When I'm writing, who do I think needs this book? Who will receive it? How will it be received? And again, just thinking about my most recent book about rape culture, I was thinking a lot, well, how are teen girls going to receive this versus teen boys? How does this topic change if I'm addressing teens of color versus white kids? And that really shaped a lot of the book and a lot of the directions that the book took. So that is kind of one of the things that I'm thinking about a lot. And I think it's a common misconception to think about YA as just being, well, as long as it's a teenage character, it's YA. And we all know that there are books that have teen characters that really weren't written with teens in mind as the person holding the book in their hands. I'm thinking like All the Pretty Horses by Cormac McCarthy or Lean on Pete by Willie Vlotton, two of my favorite books, but they are not YA books, even though they have teen main characters. Kat, anything? Seemed like a good segue.
Thank you, Amber. So I write primarily, as far as my fiction goes, I write historical fiction that most often involves the paranormal or something else supernatural. But the history is very much tied to the paranormal elements. Like my first novel is In the Shadow of Blackbirds, which is actually set during the 1918 flu pandemic. So it's very surreal to me to be living through an actual pandemic after digging into the research so much about it. In fact, I have, as Mary mentioned, I have 5 young adult novels and 2 adult novels. And my first adult novel was also set during the 1918 flu pandemic. So I've written 2 pandemic novels. My novel Odd and True for young adults also involves the polio epidemic. So I've dealt with that as well. I'm feeling a little burnt out on pandemic fiction. So during the pandemic, I'm not writing pandemic fiction because I've done that before. So my books tend to, like I said, they tend to involve paranormal elements that have something to do with the history. Like I have spirit photography in The Shadow of Blackbirds. I have Victorian hypnotism and some fun supernatural stuff that results from that in my second YA novel, The Cure for Dreaming. My most recent novel was a YA novel about Edgar Allan Poe as a teenager and his Gothic muse as a character. And it's all about the birth of his Gothic muse and how he became a writer of horror. So that's pretty much what I write in a nutshell. I use a lot of genres in my books, and that's why I had trouble getting published originally in adult fiction, is I blend so many genres together. I've got mystery and horror, love stories, coming of age tales, along with the history and the paranormals and all the ghosts and everything that's appearing in it. And publishers of adult fiction did not know what to do with my work. They did not know how to market it. They said, we love it, but we just don't know where we would put it on a bookshelf. So we can't do it. So that's why I love YA, I felt like for me personally, it's kind of a you can do whatever you want sort of reading age group for me. So I prefer that for my fiction, just because I feel like I can write exactly the type of book, the type of novel I want to write. And in fact, I even wrote a third adult novel before the whole pandemic hit, and that book has struggled to sell. And I kind of feel like it's partly because my book just doesn't quite fit into the neat categories that adult publishers want. And currently I'm also working on nonfiction, but I have some secret projects there that I'm not allowed to talk about. So nonfiction has become one of my newer categories that I'm writing in.
Well, it sounds like you do. Oh, sorry. It sounds like you do a lot of research. You have to do a lot of research for your, yeah.
Oh yeah, it's all about research for the fiction and the nonfiction. And as my day job is I'm a freelance fact checker of children's nonfiction, which has been a really fun way to earn some extra income and use my brain that just loves this research. I really do love research. That's a big part of my process.
Hey, Kat, I just wanted to dive in because I think you bring up a really, really important topic to think about, is that whatever book you're writing, it's not like you can't write a certain way, but it does have to live somewhere on the bookshelf, right? And so having worked at a bookstore, we think about that a lot. Mm-hmm. And the good thing is in the library, they're a little more constrained about where they put a book. But and in the bookstore, if we put a book someplace and it doesn't sell, but we still like the books, lots of times we'll try it in a different section where it might sell better. But it's also true. One of the things I think that makes young adult fiction different than adult fiction is that adult fiction is a very siloed kind of world. Like mystery writers are their own thing over here. They have their own clubs and organizations, and romance writers are a completely separate thing. And, you know, it's very, it's much more separate than, I think, children's writing is grouped more by age of your reader, but within that age, you know, it's all of it. And so that's one of the things that I like and appreciate a lot about young people's writing for young people, is that you have a little bit more flexibility. But yeah, that where is the book going to live on the shelf? That's a really good thing to think about, actually. When you're writing is, you know, what are you really hoping for, and what community are you trying to enter with your book? So,
and Roseanne, if you could just touch on, since you're a middle grade, you also write middle grade, could you talk a little bit about how that is different from young adult?
Sure. Right. So broadly, I mean, middle grade is generally speaking 4th to 8th grade, 8 to 14, right? Young adult is generally speaking 12 to 16. There are adult readers of young adult novels. There are kids as young as 10 who read young adult novels. So there's some overlap between the two. But I think of middle grade fiction is when a child is old enough to be reading independently, but when they're still being read out loud to quite a lot. So one of the big differences between middle grade and young adult fiction is that young adult fiction is rarely read out loud. But middle grade fiction is read out loud all the time in classrooms all around the country, and in homes. Lots and lots of families keep that reading at bedtime tradition alive until their kids are 10, 11, 12. So I think a lot about middle grade fiction as being a thing that needs to work out loud, not just reading it to yourself. And I also think of, if I'm looking at the difference between middle grade fiction and young adult fiction, I also think of middle grade fiction as more of a circular story, right? Middle grade stories tend to begin with the child character in a home place of some kind, whatever that is, and they go out and they have an adventure, but there's a return to some sort of home place, but a return as a changed person, right? Whereas I think of young adult as a more of a linear thing, because young adults are all about sort of looking inward and gathering their strength and then launching their life in a direction, right? And so I think of young adult as being more linear in that way. So yeah, so I have written young adult historical and contemporary fiction. I haven't done anything in the fantastical science fiction kind of realm as of yet. but who can say? I also write picture books, picture books are from like birth to 12 years old. So I have one picture book that was published years and years ago, which I don't think is in print anymore. I have 2 others that are in process. And so that's a whole other conversation though. So let's just stick with middle grade and young adult.
Okay, thanks. And then Sydney, in case you forgot the question, is tell us your genre and what defines it, and how does writing for your age group differ from other kinds of writing?
Sure. So I write in that speculative category. Come on over, Roseanne, it's fun. And I used to be able to say that no matter how a story started inside of my head, it would always veer off either rockets or goblins. And because every single thing that I wrote, even some of them intentionally thinking, this is just straightforward fiction. And then, I don't know, a rocket shows up. I mean, obviously that's not how it happens, but I would find that the story that I really wanted to tell was on Mars instead of in the desert, or something like that. And then fall of 2016 was a very challenging time for me. And I had this story show up that was all about somebody who is experiencing being bullied and never being able to win. And I just thought, I'm gonna tell this story where the bully gets their comeuppance. And so that one was actually straightforward contemporary fiction with a little twist of romance. So now I've written straight non-speculative fiction as well, but mostly, I'm happiest with my head buried in, I forget who, maybe all of you have actually referenced the research and just how fulfilling that is, how satisfying that is. So I had an idea for time travel. I'm married to a physicist, so I'm always like picking his brain and going, so how would this work? And he'll go, well, but so I had this time travel forever that I wanted to maybe dive into. And I was afraid of the research. I thought, oh, that's going to be, way too hard, and not kind of taking into account that I love the research on, entry, descent, and landing for getting a ship to land on Martian gravity versus Earth gravity, lunar gravity, all those things. I love that research. And so sure enough, once I do have a time travel series, and I keep coming back and adding a book to that series specifically because the research is such a joy. It can take over. It's so easy to justify buying all the books and all the audiobooks on a topic that I want to know more about. So I may have done that recently. My husband's like, I think you got another book today. Oh, I do? Oh, I wonder who keeps ordering these. So yeah, love the research. I used to think, definitely when I started writing, I thought of it as I'm writing for that 12-year-old who is, eating lunch alone and heading to the library as fast as they can, because that was me. Very, dark years during middle school and early high school, and the library and reading just, it saved. I have a friend who once said it, if it didn't save my life, it definitely saved my heart. That was Heidi Schultz, and I'm 100% with her. For sure, reading saved my heart. So when I started to write, I knew that was who I wanted to write for. My ideal reader was that 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old looking for something to say, it's going to be okay. Someday you will not be in the space that you're in right now. So but then, surprise, surprise, the ages of people that I get the most letters from are 10-year-olds and their parents writing to say, your Mars series is my daughter's favorite series. And they just want to let you know that, now they're watching Bill Nye the Science Guy, or Janet's Planet or whatever, because of your books. And so I get a lot of feedback from 10-year-olds or their parents. And then I also get letters from people who tell me, well, I'm not a young adult anymore. I've got 6 or 7 decades on this planet. And I guess, it's not a huge surprise, because you see the Bowker or the BISG reports coming out saying that, what is it, like 56% of purchases of young adult are purchased for someone who is not a young adult. So not a huge surprise, but it is interesting that they're the ones that reach out. So.
Okay, thanks. So our next question is, why do you write for kids or teens? And you sort of, I think many of you have already answered that. And then the second part is, what is your biggest challenge? So I guess the first question, and maybe just a show of hands, how many of you are writing for your own young self? I mean, who you were as a child. I mean, you think maybe? No, not for Amber. Roseanne's on the fence. Okay. All right. So the question is, why do you write for kids or teens? And what is your biggest challenge? Let's start with Kat this time.
Well, like I said before, I started writing for adults, and then, as I mentioned, just did not have success. And there's a quote. I always try to say that again. A quote from Madeleine L'Engle that I feel perfectly sums up my transition from adult fiction to young adult fiction. She said, "You have to write the book that wants to be written. And if the book will be too difficult for grownups, then you write it for children." And that's exactly kind of what happened to me. That I think that perfectly sums up why I made that switch, because within the Shadow of Blackbirds, I had actually worked on a book set during the same time period, tackling a lot of the same issues that In the Shadow of Blackbirds eventually did. But it was a book that wasn't going anywhere. I had an agent way back in the late 90s for my adult historical fiction. And just, like I said, it was just such a marketing issue. And even back then I was told, do not write historical fiction set after the year 1900. There's very strict rules, and you must have a happy ending. But I really wanted to do really dark, gritty books set in the 1900s, early 1900s, that had bittersweet endings. And I thought, well, if these adults, if they're going to really baby adult readers, let's move on to young adult fiction. And I think the kids can handle it, because the teenage years are so gritty and dark. So I've really enjoyed exploring the world of writing for teens. And I did raise my hand somewhat when you asked if you're writing for your youngest self. I was looking for books like these when I was a teen. Back then, we really didn't have young adult fiction sections, and I was mainly reading adult. I read a lot of classic Gothic literature. That was my thing. So that's probably why I wrote a novel about Edgar Allan Poe as a teenager, because I was a big 19th century Gothic literature fan. So I really like just producing these teen characters in Gothic literature, because that's something I did not find when I was younger. It was usually adults in these having the adventures in these stories. And I really feel like you can say more from the kids' point of view. You can almost say more about a historical time period, because the kids are not seeing things in terms of black and white issues. They're seeing the gray areas in between, but they can be very blunt. I noticed that in real life, I have a 16-year-old and a 21-year-old, and they will be just very blunt about what's going on, like right now, and will say harsh truths about what's happening. And they don't want anything sugar-coated, because they see right through that. And that's what's fun for me, writing from teen point of views. I feel like the characters can be really honest. And I feel like when I write my adult fiction, my characters are a lot of times almost kidding themselves, and they're dealing with the trauma of their youth a lot of the times, but they have this protective shield that they put over them. So that's something I really enjoy about exploring the YA, is having that shield. It hasn't been built yet, and so there's still able to get to the truth of the matter.
Hey, thanks. And then maybe Sydney, we can go to you. Talk a little bit about your biggest challenge, maybe.
That is so broad. Biggest challenge within.
This is the question. No.
Okay. Oh my gosh.
Interpret it how you wish.
Yeah.
As a writer, does that help?
Oh.
It's all hard. I mean, that's the thing. It's all hard, right?
Yeah. It is. It's the thing that I cannot do without. And I'm sure probably everybody on this can relate to that in some way or another, even if you let it go for a while. Yeah, biggest challenge. I think even with as many stories as I've written, I'll find myself somewhere in first drafting. First drafting's the part that I do not enjoy. I love editing. I would edit, a single manuscript for the rest of my life and probably be very happy doing that, just polishing it and moving the pieces around until everything just feels better and better. But first drafting is not it's not my happy space of writing. And inevitably I'll sit down one evening and Chris, my husband, he'll go, what's wrong? And I'm going, oh, it's so bad. It's so bad. I don't even know if I should finish this. It's just so bad. And he says, no, you keep going. That's what you always say. And I think that is the part that's hard about that is it's never changed. Every single time I write something, I'm convinced that I ought not to see it through or finish it because obviously it's so bad. And I guess I thought that would go away someday. I thought that would change. I mean, there's a slight shift maybe inside of me that says, remember, this is your process. This is how your brain does creative, does writing. Your brain does it this way. Remember that. So maybe there's been a little shift, but not the way I expected it to be. I just thought, 20 books in, I'll have this thing down. And not so much. So
Okay. Well, thanks. So that's probably your biggest challenge is getting past the first draft, maybe?
totally.
Yeah. Okay. Amber, Roseanne? Amber?
Sure, I can go. There are two things that I'm thinking of. One is a challenge that I think I've kind of figured out, but I think it's useful to talk to other writers about. And that is being able to understand the different varieties of being stuck. So sometimes, I'm at the computer and I'm like, and I'm just don't know, it's not good. It doesn't feel good. It feels awkward. It feels hard. I don't know what to do. I don't want to do it, whatever. And sometimes that stuck is like your well is empty and you need to go fill it by doing something else. Sometimes that stuck is you're going in the wrong direction and you need to step back and see, is this really where the scene needs to go? Is this really what this character would do? So sometimes it's really that. And sometimes it is just, this is a hard part and it hurts and you have to sit here and do it. And I think it helps for me to have figured out, when do I need to go walk the dog? When do I need to read some poetry, right? When do I need to just keep my butt in the chair and do the thing? And when do I need to scrap that chapter and start over because clearly it's going the wrong direction? So I think that has been helpful to my process to be able to tell the difference between those things. The thing that is still, I think, my biggest challenge, and I alluded to this a little bit when I was talking about writing the rape culture book, is that the intensity and the feelings of a book lead into the rest of my life. I'm not very good at compartmentalizing it. And right, so like, y'all remember when I had blue hair for a while, right? I was writing this totally edgy, street punk girl character. And lo and behold, I'm 45 and I've dyed my hair blue. you know, and I've written a book about grief. So that was really hard. And then, you know, this last book, you know, being in these stories of, you know, about sexual assault, about abuse, those, I mean, it was just really hard to carry. It's always hard to carry. So sometimes I might have an idea and I think, I just can't do it. It's too, that's going to hurt too much for too long, because I also know I've written enough books now to know how long it takes. Right. So it's like the second time you give birth to a child, you like know what's coming. So on the one hand, you've got skills and experience, but on the other hand, you know what's coming. So I think that's the hardest thing for me.
Thank you. And Roseanne? Roseanne, you're still muted.
There we go. I love what you said there, Amber, about like knowing when to push and when to back off, you know, because sometimes pushing does not make it better. Sometimes you just have to back off and wait. Yeah. And getting some more perspective on that as I've written for a longer period of time, that has actually been very helpful. And that was a much harder call for me to make earlier in my career as a writer. At the moment, the biggest struggle that I'm having is with the research part, which I love so much. And so that's particularly frustrating. But because of the pandemic, libraries have been closed. And so I can still borrow, but I can't go into them. Right. And so a lot of research is my walking up to the library and saying, do you have something about this thing? And they say, well, yeah, we do. But have you thought about this completely unrelated, but also useful thing that I hadn't thought of? Right. That's hugely helpful. Right. And so so that's been really hard not to be able to go into the library and actually talk to librarians and travel to the places that I want to travel safely has been hard. And then probably the most discouraged that I have been was right after Christmas this year. Before Christmas, I had reached out to a number of experts in the field that I needed to research. And right after Christmas, I found out that several of them had died.
Oh,
so
that's hard. Yeah.
Right. And it just made me think about the whole pandemic and like every single one of 500,000 people is a treasure of knowledge, right? And what have we even, like, that's a whole grief for another era, but we have lost a lot. We don't even know what we've lost, right? And so that was like particularly discouraging to me in this moment. Ordinarily, research is not hard for me. I love it. And, you know, I have many resources available to me. But in this particular moment, I found the research especially hard. But the thing I love most, though, about writing for middle grade audience is that middle graders are very open-hearted, you know? And I know from working in a bookstore, I know it is very rare for a grown-up to read outside of their worldview, right? A few people do, but most grown-ups are very, you know, they have a worldview and they choose books from within that worldview. And there's lots to choose within each one, right? It's not like they're restricting the number of books they read, but kids are very open-hearted about their reading. They'll read anything. They'll try anything. And their world, in part, is made up of what they read. And that's pretty exciting. So I do love that a lot. That's very fun. And I love at the bookstore, I love helping a kid find a new author or a new series or a new story that they really love. That's super fun.
That's kind of neat that you get both ends of the spectrum. You're writing the books and you're selling the books. So that's kind of neat. So I'm going to move on to the next question. Actually, I'm going to jump to a different question. But anyway, so what is the best part of being a writer? And is there anyone I haven't started? I don't think well, Roseanne, you sort of just answered that question. So can I go to, I don't know, who wants to answer that question? What's the best part of being a writer? Don't all jump at once.
I'll go.
Thank you.
I think there's so many things about writing that is challenging and hard and makes you want to give up from time to time. Actually, not just time to time, but there's so much that can make us quit as writers, no matter what stage you're at, because it's frustrating. There's so much waiting, and you pour your heart and soul in. But I would say there are a few things that bring me the greatest joy as a writer. When I love when I can get into the groove and rhythm of a book that I'm excited about. Sometimes that's at the beginning of the writing process when I'm thinking, okay, this is an idea that's just really grabbing me, and it's making me want to write about it. But I also, like what Roseanne said, just connecting with your readers is just lovely. I don't receive a ton of fan mail, but the fan mail I receive usually moves me to tears. It seems like when my readers reach out to me, it's really heartfelt a lot of the times, and it's just it's a strange concept to think that you can affect a person's life so dramatically, and it makes you realize what a responsibility you have as an author, that you are potentially affecting somebody's life and affecting their attitude toward life, and can steer kids on different career paths. I've heard of one person who wanted to go into epidemiology. Is that the right term? Studying diseases from reading In the Shadow of Blackbirds. So there's people changing what they want to study because of my books. So just that awesome responsibility it's humbling, and it's also inspiring. So that's a big thing. But before I even was a published author, since I know that's a post-publication type of joy, I would say just the pleasure of finding a story that really speaks to you. That there's something that I think that's why we all start as writers, is that passion that grips us. And I love the feeling of walking around my house with a story developing in my head, and sometimes forgetting what I'm doing when I'm in a room because I'm plodding away, and there's nothing that quite tops that.
Thank you. And Amber, how about for you? What's the best part?
I think the best part is when I'm in that flow state of writing and I sort of lose track of what I'm doing. I'm 100% focused. I was a ballet dancer before too. And, I think there are other ways that like athletes experience flow state, performers experience flow state. It's exhilarating when that happens on the page.
Thank you. And Sydney? I always want to say Cindy, but it's Sydney.
It's Sydney was the nickname my best friend called me that when I was in kindergarten, which was the year I learned to read. I got my first library card, and but Cindy, it's another name that when I was a kid I got called too. So I respond to all of them. I think, okay, so speaking of that child who loved to read and write, I think my favorite part of writing is getting to do the thing that I loved so much as a little kid. I really was that kid that you gave me a pencil and a sheet of paper, and I'm writing a story, and I'm writing another one, and I'm writing another one. And then there was, the adult part of my life where I thought, oh, I can't spend my time doing this anymore. I need to get passing grades in college. I need to find a career, and really kind of set the purposeful time, the purposeful writing time, just kind of push that to one side. And I might, work on a poem for a while or an essay or something, but I wasn't writing stories anymore. So for me, the best part of this thing that I do are those mornings where I wake up and I'm thinking this story through, and my characters are talking to each other, and I realize, oh, I've got to go write this down. I've got to go write this down right now. And those are the feelings I remember having as a young kid, falling in love with story. So those don't happen every day, but I love the mornings that they do happen. And for sure, that keeps me at it, keeps me going back.
Thank you.
I think one of the things that well, there are two things that I really love about it. One is because I have 4 children and an enormous extended family as well. I just love it that when you're done with the story, you're done. Because what other of, you know what I mean? I'm like, didn't I feed you people yesterday? I'm pretty sure I've slept this floor already. I have already washed these clothes. Like, but I don't, when you finish the story, it's really done. And then you don't have to do another thing to it. You don't have to nothing. I love that. It's very satisfying. Because everything else in my life it's an endless stream of tasks that are never done. So that's very satisfying. But the other thing I would say, the thing that has kept me in it all the time that it took to get published in the first place, and through, you know, the highs and lows of the, you know, the journey all the way through, the thing that's really kept me with it is that I really like book people. You know, all of them, not just writers are fun to be with. They're really fun and interesting to hang out with. I really love librarians. Booksellers are awesome, right? Teachers, you know, these are people who care about the things that I care about, right? I know I was in the honors program at my college, and the other girls were extremely scornful of me because I wanted to be an educator. And they were like, oh, but you could have so much more money. You're smart. You could have so much more money doing some other thing. And I'm like, that is true. And yet I do not want to spend my working day with you, sister, because you are not fun at all. And you don't care about any of the things I care about. And so I really love that this is the writing community, regardless of how successful you are. It's just really lovely people to hang out with, and I enjoy that very much, and I'm grateful for it. It's made all the difference.
And we really appreciate all of you guys coming and sharing all this. I'm not done yet, though. I have a couple more questions. So I'm going to start with you, Roseanne, because I haven't started with you yet. The question is, how do you use social media or otherwise promote your books? In other words, how do you promote your
Oh, how do I promote my books? Yeah. So,
and do you use social media? Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think of social media as something that I do for book promotion so much as community connection is sort of more my thought there. Right. So, for example, Twitter is probably the thing that I use the most, because you can drop in for 5 minutes, but you don't have to stay and do anything there. You know, you can just dip in for 5 minutes. And I love it because I have writer friends from all over the country. And so it's a quick, easy way to see, oh, this friend of mine, you know, from Atlanta has a new book out, right? Or a new book will come into the bookstore, and I'll take a quick picture of it and say, you know, hey, this, you know, look, it's in my bookstore. So that kind of community kind of thing is what I think of Twitter is more for. And so I prefer that about social media, is that it's more about connecting with people and trying to be useful. Sometimes people are asking for book suggestions, or, you know, if I like this, what else would I like? That kind of thing. I think social media is great for that. Actually saying, I did something fabulous and I would like you to buy it now. It's not, I don't think social media is all that well suited to that task, really. So as far as promoting the books, I mean, the thing that I probably do the most is connect with teachers and librarians. But it's not like it's a required part about being a children's author. I do school visits because I am a teacher, right? I do library things because I understand what teachers and librarians need the book to do in the school, which is only tangentially connected with what's actually in the book. Right? But they need their books to do certain things in the school. And so because I have some sense of that, and because I have a general understanding of curriculum at various ages, right? So I can make a school visit that serves the school well. But again, my school visits are not something I've ever promoted. I did a couple well, and those schools talk to other schools. So a lot of the promotion for your books is mostly going to be done by other people. It's going to be done by booksellers who read your book and loved it. And, you know, publicists at your publisher who introduced the book around to booksellers and librarians. But most of the publicity for your book is going to be done by people other than you, right? And so I had this publicist who had such great advice. And I was asking her about social media. So I was like, what, of all the social media options, which one is the best? And she's like, nobody knows. People don't really know. People try a bunch of things and they usually settle on one or two that are comfortable for them. She said, here's what I want you to know. If you discover that you really suck at something, please stop doing that. Which is like the best life advice in general. If you discover that you really suck at a thing, you can just stop doing that. So, yeah.
Okay. So I'm curious, for the young adult authors, are school visits as effective as they would be for middle grade? Sydney, are you a young adult?
Gosh, yeah, I don't think I've ever done, I'm trying to think if I have. The school visits that I've done have been middle schools and sometimes even like fourth, fifth, to work with them as a writer and say, here's what a writer does, because there were times when none of us knew that, or we thought, well, I think it's like this. Am I right or not? So but honestly, I don't think I've ever. Oh no, I did a summer program one year. There was like a 1 week summer program in the town that I live in. The arts community came together and hired me to do that. So that was with actual young adults. But yeah, not mostly. And I would. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, and what about promoting your book in other ways and also social media?
Yeah. Social media, I'm with Roseanne. It's not a place that you're going to convince readers to buy your book. That's not its its intention, its purpose. You will. Yeah, but it's great for connecting with people. And I've gotten ideas before from, watching what somebody's doing at NASA at High Rise in Hawaii. And so I feel like I get to kind of expand my world by what people are bringing into my writing cave room from all over the place. So that's very helpful. That's very useful.
And then about promotions, do you leave it up to your publicist?
No. So I am it. And I mean, I will, take out ads, keep a mailing list. That would be something I would encourage everybody to do, which is super useful, because people who want to be on your mailing list, they're the people that want to hear from you. They want to know that, oh, you just did a nonfiction? Great. I want to check that out. They're the people who want to know, you've got a picture book? Well, I've got grandkids, or I babysit, and so having, that mailing list, that really is worth putting some time into. And so I do try to make sure that I reach out and touch base with my list. And then also the other thing that I was trying to do is go, if you don't want to be here, here's the unsubscribe button. It's really big. It's right here. So that, and that makes me certain that the people that I'm sending my newsletter out to are actually excited to have it in their inbox. So
you don't want them doing this when they see your newsletter.
No, they're free to unsubscribe and, spend their time doing what works better for them.
Okay. And Kat, how about you? The question about social media and also how do you promote your book?
Well, I used to, I think, really put a lot of pressure on myself to promote on social media. And I think that just comes straight out of the publishing industry. They make authors feel like we need to promote ourselves heavily on social media. It might be changing. I think it's changing a bit now. I think because authors are talking about it more and saying, no, social media is not doing what you're claiming it's doing. But like for my first novel, I did all sorts of giveaways. I was spending money on buying just little things related to my book to give away. If you followed me on Twitter, I made my own book trailer. I had a whole book trailer reveal blog tour with other blogs. And it ate up so much of my time and energy. And my the month that my book debuted is just a blur because I was writing so many blog posts and just getting all these things ready to go. And there's no data to show if that helps or not. It's really, that's the most frustrating thing, is you don't know if it's working or not. And what I found working for that book, and that's my first novel, still the book that is my book that sold the best, is just, it was writing as strong of a book as I could possibly write, and then having other people do the work for me. The word of mouth was the big deciding factor on how that book found readers, librarians, teachers, booksellers. There was not a big publicity budget from my own publisher. So it was not backed up with this big publicity plan that could propel it into becoming a bestseller. But I did get on the radar of librarians and teachers. And so my book got on awards lists and state lists. And that's kept it in print. And that's still the book that I tend to, I don't earn royalties on all of my books. The way authors get paid is a whole other, that could be a whole other panel topic, but that's the book that still pays me. And so I think the lesson I learned from that is and this is, a lot of authors say this too, is the number one thing we have in our control is the writing itself. That's what we really need to focus on, no matter what people tell you need to do to sell your book, is you have the power to make your book as strong as possible and the type of book you want to write. And that's what the main focus should be on. And I do school visits. I've done some. I even have a school visit booking agent. It's harder to get visits as a young adult author than it is as a middle grade author. According to authors and this booking agent. I'm, like I said, I have some future projects coming along for younger audiences, and I talked to my agent about it. And because even before the pandemic, we were having some trouble booking events. And she said, when this next book comes out, I think it's going to be a lot easier, because it's just hard getting the high schools to bring authors in. But I have traveled. I did a really great virtual high school visit this past fall. That was great. I thought it was going to be stressful doing a virtual visit, but it actually was one of my favorite visits ever, just because somehow we were able to still make a connection, even though I wasn't in person. So, but it's not necessarily my favorite thing to do because it involves a lot of preparation and travel and time. But it's something I do. It's one of those things I get nervous about doing it beforehand, but once I've done it, I say, oh, that was fun. I loved connecting with everyone. So it's kind of a love-hate relationship with the school.
You're always glad when it's over, right?
Exactly. It's like, that was wonderful. I'll do it again. And then when the next one comes, it's like, oh my gosh, why did I say yes?
Okay. And Amber, I don't think you've answered this question yet. How do you use social media and how do you promote your books?
My social media is all sled dog mushers and circus artists and activists of color. That's pretty much
now, I see other people smiling, but I think you are absolutely serious, right?
I am 100% serious. That is what my Twitter feed is like. So I also don't use it for promotion. I think relationships are key. Those for the middle grade series that I co-wrote, I met my co-author on Twitter. That's how we met. So that was kind of fun. There are all sorts of, and I really think that the most important thing in this business, besides writing your best possible work, is to build authentic relationships that are based on authentic connection, not on like tit for tat, or you do this for me, partially because of what Roseanne said earlier, which is that book people are really super fun to hang out with and you want to hang out with them as much as you can, but also because you never know what connections might help, right? I mean, this is just a tiny example, but like, I love that book, American War by Omar El-Akkad. He came and did a reading in Redmond, and there were like 4 of us there when his book came out. I mean, now he's like interviewing Margaret Atwood. So, and we talked, because there were only 4 people at that event, right? We chatted. I really got to know him. I was super excited. We stayed in touch. And one of my agency mates wrote a book about Guantanamo. And I'm like, oh, you got to know Omar. You got to talk to Omar, because he covered Guantanamo as a journalist. they met. He ended up writing the foreword for her book. Like, cool things like that are really fun. Did that help me sell any books? No. It was really awesome, though, for my friends that I've made. So I think that you never know how those relationships are going to play out. Like, I'm doing an event at Jesuit High School in a couple weeks, because I've known this librarian for so many years. I knew her when she was an elementary school librarian, and when I did a school visit for her when I had it with a picture book so long ago. So I think that is really worthwhile for social media. And otherwise, I do think that it's kind of a fraud that you have to have a blog and do a blog tour and do a book trailer and do giveaways and have swag. And I just don't think that's what makes books find their readers. I think it's a lot more stochastic than that.
So how do you find your readers? Just through the relationship building?
Well, some of it is if you're publisher. I mean, I'm a traditionally published author. So, I mean, Sydney is really the book whisperer in this area, because she's built this incredibly strong readership herself. Kudos to you, Sydney. I tend to rely on publishers, and it's interesting how differently that plays out, right? Like, I have some books that are published with a traditional publisher that is more trade book focused, and others that are more school and library market focused. It's really different how they roll out those books, how the books are published, what a successful book looks like for each segment. So I try to have a really good, strong working relationship with my publicists at my publishing houses. I try to help and be non-annoying and non-high maintenance. And I think that's really useful. I do really value my relationships with librarians and teachers, because I think that, has led to school visits or workshops or appearances that have been really meaningful for me, both personally, in terms it's good for the books too, but also I really like those opportunities to interact directly with teens.
I think something else when you're thinking about promotion that's useful to think about is to actually ask your editor, what do you consider a successful outcome for this book?
Oh, wow.
Right? Because it's not always what you think it is, right? In fact, my first editor was at Random House, and I had a book that was moderately successful right out of the gate, and we were talking about what I needed to do, and he said, don't worry about writing. You don't have to write a blockbuster for me. He said, I'm Random House. I already have one. It'll be fine. He said, do you know what I want you to do though? He said, I want you, because of the way you write, I want you to write a book that teachers and librarians will depend on. I want you to become the author who says, Roseanne wrote that book. It's going to be fine. I'm going to buy it before I've read it, because I know what a good writer she is, and it will be fine. And he was right about that, right? I'm not making the Wolf book is doing very well. I'm not making a fortune on any of my other books, right? But they still did fine, right? And so what is a success for a book is often far less than you think it is, right?
I will totally echo that. The only thing that I have that was purchased traditionally, my expectations, I thought I was doing terribly for them, and comes to find out, no, this is the path that we saw for your book, and you're heading right straight down the middle of it. And that was such a relief. So I think, yeah, ask. It wasn't me that asked, they volunteered the information, but I think that is really good advice.
Yeah, and ask, what does that number mean, right? For example, this surprised me too when I was asking my editor about my numbers at the very beginning. He said, these are the sales numbers and they're okay, but they're not exciting. He said, here's the number I'm excited about. Nobody's returning this book. Do you know what that means? They think it might win an award. That's what that means. if they're holding on to your book for the whole year long, because they want to still have it in case it wins an award at the end of the year, right? So like that sort of thing, I was like, who knew? Returned. I had no idea. It wouldn't have even occurred to me, right? But the rate of return, so the numbers don't necessarily mean what you think they mean, but it's worth asking. And some things that seem very absolute, right, are also not the same, right? Because A Wolf Called Wander, this one was on the New York Times bestsellers for quite a little while. This one, which came after it, did not hit the New York Times bestsellers list, but it sold the same number of copies. Right?
Really?
Yes, I know, because it's not an absolute. It's a comparative thing compared to how other things. And because of the pandemic, children's book sales are much higher overall, right? So even when, you would think that means that this did worse, and they're like, no, it's doing fine. It's in fact doing exactly the same as the other one, but it doesn't, like that marker that everybody looks for, not there for this book because of, a quirk of the moment, right? So there's so many things that aren't in your control, right? First of all, but I would totally ask. And then I would also realize that most of those things are not in your power to change. And so, the thing that's in your power is to write another good book. So.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm looking at the time at 7:00 and we need to open up for questions. I've got one question here already, and it is to everyone. So who have I not started with? I don't remember. Kat, how about you go first? The question is, well, it's written, what is your favorite book that you have written and why?
Oh, our favorite book that we've written. Oh, that's hard because there are
They're
children.
all your babies, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, I would say more, it's like I like them. I love them for different reasons. I do have a very special place in my heart for my debut novel, just because it was the book that finally broke me into the world of publishing. And like I said, it's the one that's done the best. But I'm also very attached to my novel Odd and True, because that was based a lot on my relationship with my sister. It's hard to say. I could say which books were my troublemakers easier than I could say which ones I love the best. I think my hardest book was The Raven's Tale, the novel about Poe. That book threatened to break my brain. It just trying to figure out how to write a novel about a person's life was a bigger challenge than I realized, because it was meant, I had a contract, a 2-book deal contract, and I owed my publisher a second young adult novel, so it had to be a novel. And it took me 3 different drafts before I figured out how to write that book as a novel. And I still feel like I could go in there and change it even more. So yeah, but as far as top favorite, that's a really hard one. And sometimes it's the book that I'm currently writing, I'll say, because that's what I'm all excited about in the moment. So yeah, that's a tricky one.
Yeah. How about you, Roseanne? Do you have a favorite, and which one is it?
Well, what Kat said, it's a hard choice to make, but the one that I'm particularly fond of and is Last of the Name, which came out the same year as A Wolf Called Wander and was very much overshadowed by the success of the other. Last of the Name is a historical fiction set in 1863 about Irish immigrants to the United States. My father's people are from Ireland, and Irish music and dancing has been a huge part of my family's life. And I've wanted to write about a boy who dances for a long time, because my son was an Irish dancer for years and years and years. And so I finally, when I found out, when I was at World Championships with my son, we did a little poking around, and we found a famine ship museum in Dublin. And one of the things that I learned when I was looking at Irish immigration is that the largest category of emigrating Irish person during those famine years from the 1840s to the 1870s was a single girl between the ages of 12 and 24 traveling all by herself, which was a big surprise to me, especially that it would be a girl and not a boy and traveling alone. And the reason was because that's the years when we had the Civil Wars in there, and that's when America really threw off slavery finally. And so during that time, many households in the North had Black house servants, and it became very unfashionable to have Black house servants. And so many of those families dismissed their Black servants and they took Irish girls instead, partly because they could pay them less. But from the Irish, that was, it was huge. It was transformational to those individual family lives and also to the country, because they were, that period was basically an extended genocide. And so they came from living in starving to death, basically, right, to a job where they were fed every day, they had a roof over their heads, and they were paid besides.
And they could send money home to their families, probably.
Mm-hmm. It changed the course of their country because Britain had been trying for 800 years to make them poor. Mm-hmm. And now, finally, because of these teenage girls, they had a source of money that Britain could not touch.
And it girl power.
So I was like, what would happen, right? If for a girl to be in that situation. But I also wanted to write about a boy who dances. And so I wrote about a brother and a sister pair who come over, and because they, the army would want to take him, because they're orphans, the army would want to take the boy, or an orphan train or a mill or something. And so in order to stay together, the older sister bullies him into dressing as a girl so they can stay together and work as domestic.
Oh, fun.
It was a lot of fun to write. It was fun. It was kind of funny. And it was just about something that I cared about a lot. So
that's your favorite. What was the name of that one again? Because I want to read that one.
Called Last of the Name. And it's by Lerner, which is the same publisher that Amber has written for as well.
Oh, yeah. Good. Okay. And Amber, how about you? What is your favorite one that you have written?
My debut novel, The Way Back from Broken, was based on a very personal tragedy. And so while it was a really painful book to write, it was also a really healing book to write. And I feel like I was able to take a lot of my own personal pain and put it into the pages, with the result that I myself was unburdened. And so I'm grateful for that.
Writing is great therapy, isn't it? I mean, really. Yeah. Okay, thank you. And then Sydney, your favorite book and why?
Favorite book. I'm going to go with book 2 in my Mars series, Defying Mars. When I was a kid, I always wanted to read science fiction where the girl captained the ship or the girl saved the planet, and I just couldn't find it. And I actually stopped reading science fiction altogether when I was about 14 because it just wasn't doing it for me. So, this series, Saving Mars, is about a girl who she saves 2 planets. Spoiler. But she wasn't the captain of the ship, and I tried to make her, and I just couldn't. That wasn't where she was. She was a pilot. She loved piloting, and pilots and captains aren't the same. So, but in book 2, she gets to captain the ship, and I threw absolutely every bad thing that could happen in space at her. She ends up alone, and there was even a sense in which I was saying, how much is she going to take of this? Is she going to give up? And she just got stubborner and dug her heels in harder. And I just kept throwing these horrible things at her. I'd be like researching what can go wrong on the ISS, what can go wrong on, so that's probably my favorite. I have a standalone, actually, Siren Spell, about a ballet family. The grandmother and the mother are from Russia. The daughters, one of them was born in Russia, but both of them grew up in America. And I got to throw in everything I know about Russian food and culture, because that's my mom's side of the family. So that was really fun too.
Great. So that was the only question in the question box. So if you are watching and you have a question, please put something in the question box. I do have a question. I was thinking about this. Many of you, if not all of you, have won awards. And my question is, how does that process work? Because I know you don't just write a book and then suddenly somebody sees it and gives you an award. What is the process? Do you have to submit it? Do you, when you write your book, are you specifically thinking, oh, well, I'll write it in this region because maybe it'll qualify for this regional award? How does that work? And I don't care who starts because I'm really curious about this.
I'm going to tell you a story.
Okay.
So,
I'm ready.
So I've published a couple novels with Lerner Publishing, and my good friend Alana Arnold has also published there. And she and I toured together for my book Point Claw and her book What Girls Are Made Of. And I don't know even how we got to talking about this, but our agents had both written award clauses into our contracts, which means if you win an award, you get a financial bonus. And we're like, well, did they submit them? Like, especially, we're like, what was going on here, right? And so we reached out to our agents, and our agents reached out to our editors, and we're like, did you submit these books for National Book Award, for the Prince, for those kinds of things? And because shockingly, like in our category that year, the National Book Award, I think only had about 300 books nominated, because publishers have a limitation to how many books they can submit. So they they get to put 2 books in for the Newbery or something like that. And so that's what they do. Well, our publisher was quite small. Our list was really small. I think there were only 5 books on our YA list. So, but our books actually wouldn't have been submitted if our agents hadn't said, you need to submit these books. And then Alana was a finalist for the National Book Award for that book.
Wow.
Which is super awesome. Things like my book was a finalist for the Oregon Book Award. And that was the kind of thing, like your publicist gives you a questionnaire, like they want to know your alma mater, they want to know where you live, because they're trying to match you with a lot of things like that. And so it was one of those things where I would see the announcement for the Oregon Book Award and I'd send it to the publicist and say, did you submit this? Please submit this. This is like our regional award. So sometimes your publicist is doing it and sometimes they require assistance.
Okay. Anybody else?
I would also say about awards, this is not so true of young adult books. For middle grade and younger books, the American Library Association awards are sort of the biggies, the Newbery and the Caldecott. And that does grant some prestige and staying power to a book, but it does not necessarily translate to much in the way of book sales, right? There'll be
really?
Because every library will get a copy of the latest Newbery. But unless people happen to love that book and check it out all the time so that it wears out and the library replaces it, then the winning the Newbery is no guarantee of sales. The thing that drives sales more than those books is that every state has a Children's Choice Book Award, or almost every state has a Children's Choice Book Award. And so that is a list that is chosen by librarians. It's usually somewhere between 12 and 20 books. And when your book is on that list, that means every school library in that state is going to buy between 1 and 12 copies of your book, every single library in the state. It also means that there's grant money to buy those books in that state. It means that every teacher in that state is going to be aware of your book, and many teachers will buy it for their own classroom library. And the teachers will read those books, and the ones they like, they will tend to read over and over again, right? So that is honestly a huge driver of literary fiction for kids. If it were not for the OBOB and the Oregon Reader's Choice Award and its various clones around the country, honestly, we would only have Diary of a Wimpy Kid and The Hunger Games, really, right? Because
well, how do you get on that list? You
don't get on that list. Librarians choose the books for that list. So there isn't a way to lobby for it, other than to make sure that the thing that you can do is support your public libraries and support your school libraries. If there isn't a librarian in your kid's school, go to the school board and insist that they hire one. If there aren't librarians in your county, in your state, show up at the school board, show up at the election box, show up, ask your state representative, why are there no school libraries? Write letters and make it happen, right? That is huge. The presence of a librarian in school makes a huge difference to the number of books that are bought. And even if you're writing for adults, right? The kid who does not fall in love with a book when they're 12 or younger is the adult who never walks into a bookstore because they don't think there's anything in there for them, right? A kid they'll read what you make them read in high school and college, but adults who are readers are adult readers because they loved a book when they were a kid. And so that's what's in it for, even if you're not writing for children, that's what's in it for you. So making sure that you're advocating both for public libraries and school libraries, that's the best thing that you can do, right? That doesn't help your individual book. That helps all books and all of literacy in this country, really. So if I have a soapbox, that's it, man. Support your libraries because they make a huge difference.
All right.
I can speak to something kind of different since most everything that I've written has been self-published. And so that meant that, I just wasn't eligible for awards by and large. But I did do something that I would very much encourage people to do. Put on your brave armor and submit your book to Kirkus Reviews. They famously advertise that they're the meanest critics. I forget how they put it, but something like that. And to get a review back from them really kind of meant the world for me, especially, because it got a star. The one, it's expensive to do, as you have to pay for that if you are independently published, because you don't have a publisher who is buying ad space in their magazine. So the way that they recover their revenue and cover the cost of getting your book reviewed is to charge you cash. So I've only done it for a couple of my titles, just, because it's expensive, but it was very much worth doing. And then that was what actually led to, I had no idea that they, this is silly, but I didn't know that they did awards every year, that they had a list that they create. So being on that list then definitely got me all kinds of libraries stocking the title, which was great. And then also just kind of let me know, hey, you're doing okay. You're doing something right. And that gave me the courage to continue. Absolutely. That gave me the courage to continue doing what I love. So.
Okay. Thank you. How about you, Kat?
I'll just quickly add, piggybacking on what Sydney said, is I would also encourage authors before they even get published to submit their works to contests and potential awards. That's something that I did before I was ever published. And you have to do your research, you do your homework, and make sure you're not getting into scammy contests or anything like that. But I did that just very early on in my writing career, and even though I was not having success getting published, sometimes I'd earned a little bit of money. It certainly was a great motivator to keep me writing. I felt like, okay, I'm getting some recognition here, something I could put on my query letters when I'm writing to agents. At one time I won an award through the Hollywood Film Festival. It was a strange occurrence where I sent my manuscript in. This was for a book, one of my adult novels I had written in the past. I received a letter saying, sorry, you're not moving on to the finals or semifinals. But then we got a phone call from the guy who was in charge of the Hollywood Film Festival saying, hey, I found your manuscript lying around here. You won this contest. We're going to give you money, and we want you to come to the Hollywood Film Festival. So it was this really weird, surreal thing that it was just something this was in the early days of the internet. So I'd found it on some writing website. That site probably doesn't even exist. I don't remember where I found that one. But I feel like that's like a big bit of advice I could give for people who are not published yet. And as far as being a published author with the awards, I think you had asked, is that something you have in mind as you're writing? And that's just something that it's another thing that's not really in your control all that much, besides what Roseanne was saying about building up relationships. And but I feel like there was nothing I did to get my book on any award lists or state lists besides writing the book. My publicist for my first 3 books, well, no, every single YA novel I've had, I had a different publicist working on it each time. So a lot of it depends on the strength of the publicist that you have, and whether or not they're sending it. I didn't actually know what, was it Amber? Was it you who had said that they have a limit on how many books they could submit to the awards? I actually didn't know that until tonight. So that was interesting to learn. I feel like definitely awards have been very helpful for my book. My debut novel was a Morris Award finalist, which is one of the big awards through Yelza for debut YA novels. And that really helped me continue publishing in the YA genre. It helped me get visits. That school visit I was just talking about in November, that was for my debut novel, In the Shadow of Blackbirds. They wanted me to talk about that book because we're in the middle of a pandemic, and it's my pandemic YA novel. So yeah, it's helpful, but it's also really hard when your book doesn't get awards. And that's something that's, I know, tough on authors. When the award season comes around, if you're not seeing your book get on those lists, it's discouraging. And one thing that's been hard for me personally is I was so lucky and have my debut novel get on so many lists, including all those state lists. And then you feel like you have to live up to that book. And it is hard when you can't, it's like, what can I do to get back to that status again? But it's so arbitrary, and it depends so much on what books are coming out at the same time and what your publicist is doing with your books. So it's just another one of those things you just have to put your head down and write.
Okay, thank you.
Can I
So I'm
add
looking at the,
to that though, Mary, just really quickly, is, your publicists are busy. They have multiple titles they're promoting. How well they know your book. What if they're just working from the jacket flap? Maybe they haven't read your book. And I think it's really benefited me to be an advocate for myself. So like Point Claw has LGBTQ themes that aren't on the jacket flap, but I push them to submit that for awards in that category, and got on a lot of good lists because of that. Similarly, there's the Amelia Bloomer list is a feminist list. I have to remind the publicist, like, my book fits this category. Could you put it in for that? So I do think there's a place to be an advocate for your own book.
okay, thank you. So there are 3 questions now in the box, and we've got like 10 minutes. So I'm just going to read the one question for you guys to answer in the chat box, if that makes sense. Irene asked, what are your go-to books to recommend and or that you admire? So if you panelists wouldn't mind just putting that in the chat box, then it'll be there. Linda asks, she's interested in the process of obtaining an agent/publisher. I know that's a really big issue, so if you guys would like to condense it somehow.
Well, I can give you my best tip is that after you've written the best book you can possibly write, of course, there's that part. I think it's really useful to develop a list of comps, and it might not be like the exact same type of book, but it's really useful to have 10 or 15 books that are recent within the last 3 years, maybe 5, but do not give me a 20-year-old comp. And it might even be that the tone or the audience is a comp, not even necessarily the topic. And then once you have that list, you can shell out the bucks to join Publishers Marketplace for a month or 2. And you can go in there and you can search on an author, and you'll know the editor who bought it and the agent who sold it. And so that you start with those comp books, right? And then you're like, oh, well, that's an interesting list of agents. Now you go into Publishers Marketplace and you put in that agent and see what other books that agent has sold. Does it seem like a good fit? Is it somebody who where you could imagine fitting into their list in some way. And then that is a way to really target the list that you're submitting to. And then you do all of the querying things that one does. And I think it's really important to remember that it is really all about the right book with the right person at the right time. That's true for acquiring an agent. It's true for getting a publisher, right? If your agent has just taken on a YA paranormal writer with a pandemic book that they're putting on the market, they're not gonna pick up Kat as a client. That's just, she might be the, awesome book, but she's not the right book at the right time with the right person. You never know if somebody just absolutely despises baseball and you've sent them a baseball book.
I've seen that in agents' things. They say, do not send me anything about circuses or something like that.
Yeah, right. So, I think that it's important to remember that so that you don't get too discouraged.
Before I ask if anybody else has anything to add, I will say that our local library system has, I forget what they call it, but you can contact the librarian and you can ask them to help with finding a comp for your book. So I had written something and I took it to the children's library and I say, I need to find some comps for this. And they read it. It was a very small, manuscript. And they gave me 3 comps, which was wonderful. Of course, I haven't done anything with it yet, but. So does anybody else have any abbreviated version of how you get agents, publishers, or has Amber pretty much covered it?
Well, actually, another way to find good comps for your book is to go into a bookstore and say, hey, I read a book recently that was about this and this. What else is like that? You don't even need to tell them you're looking for a comp for your own book, but just say, I'm looking for a book about, Irish immigrants in the Civil War era, and see what they'll say, right? There might be a ton of things already published. There might be just a few. They might be super excited about something. That can be a useful way to get a sense of sort of the field that you're working within. But I would also say that there's a reason that the Writers Guild exists, right? There's a reason that Willamette Writers has been an enduring organization in Oregon for decades now, right? There's a reason the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators has chapters in literally every country in the world that people are writing in English. So yeah, I think writers' organizations can be very helpful, both for, companions for the journey and also for conferences and information and publications that can help you answer them, because it is such a long topic, but can answer your questions along the way. And Willamette Writers in particular, they have a conference every year in which they bring agents and editors who are specifically looking for things. And so, that's one way to meet them.
Yeah, I attended a lot of conferences in my pre-publication days and many in my post-publication days too, but I didn't find my agent through that through a conference, but I just found it very helpful in just learning the process, getting practice and putting my work in front of agents and editors. And always my big advice to people is if an agent is telling you that they want to charge you money to work with them, to run away, they should be earning their money through their commissions on your work. So, when I was a new young author, I did come across a scam like that, and luckily did not fall for it. Learned very quickly that's something to stay away from. But so that's something I really, really stress, is that there are predatory agents out there. To really do your homework, there's sites like the Association of Authors Representatives that can help you find legitimate agents, but do your research, look into who they're representing. If you are unsure about an agent's reputation, you can always, ask around. There's a lot of writers boards that will discuss agents, and so yeah, as with everything, doing your research and your homework is very beneficial in this business before you jump into anything.
Thank you. I do have one last question, and it says, this is from Tamara. Have you ever run into a conflict between what you believe preteens or teens want to read versus what the parents and librarians buying books think is appropriate for kids to read? Sydney, you're smiling. Let's let you start.
Sure. Yeah. I think that conflict is kind of inherent in becoming your own person, which is what you're involved in doing when you're a young adult. So, yeah, I think there's always going to be conflicts there.
You just go ahead and write what you want to write.
There is almost always an audience for, well, I guess, I don't know, maybe that's too broad of a statement, but you've got to write a book and cross your fingers that there are readers out there that are looking for the kind of story that is in you to tell. That was I'll just leave it there.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's another reason to support libraries, because libraries are pretty broad about what they'll buy. They'll buy topics that are very niche. They'll buy topics that are controversial. It will depend a little bit based on the community and who's in charge of the money for the library, but librarians in general are extremely broad-minded about books. And so when you support your libraries in your community, that means the child has a place to go that they don't need their parents to buy the book for them. They don't, or their grandparents, right? So I think, I mean, that's sort of the answer to the question, is to make sure that public library and school library access is available as broadly as possible, that those libraries are as well supported as they can be, because then teens particularly don't have to rely on their parents to buy the book for them.
So I have thoughts. I have written multiple titles that are sex positive titles for teens. So my books have been subject to challenge in libraries, been told by school librarians, I love your book. I wish I could put your book on the shelves. I can't buy your book. I can't put your book on the shelves. But if you're going to write a book about first-time sex for teens, for example, as one might have done, that's just the book you're going to write, right? And this is going to happen. Same with the rape culture book. And there have been librarians and teachers that have gone to bat for me, and often they've been victorious. I mean, there was one challenge though where I thought this librarian was going to get fired because of my book. That was super hard. That was a super hard thing to have happen. But you know, I knew that going in, right? I knew that was a thing going into that book. On the much smaller side of things, and this is a story that is not about my book, it's about Fonda Lee, and I don't think she would mind me sharing it, but in her first YA, she had one F-bomb, and her editor's like, just wanted to let you know that if you keep this in there, it's not going to be like a Scholastic book club pick. So it's cool, whatever you want. Like, do you want to keep it in there? And she's like, yeah, no, I don't need to have the F-bomb in there. It's not like my artistic choice that has to be made right here. But there might be other things that would, right? I mean, so there are places where authors do have to make nuanced choices about what they're doing and why.
And I think a good editor too will help you think through those things, right? A lot of it is deciding, who am I writing this book for, right? If you're writing a sex positive book for 10-year-olds, that's going to be a super big struggle, right? But if you're writing a sex positive book for teens, there is an audience for that, right? And there are bookstores that will sell it. And if not every library will carry it, many will, right? And so part of it is having those conversations with your editor. I loved it. My editor, when we were talking about swearing, he's like, it's not that you can't have swearing, but you should know swearing is loud on the page in a way it isn't in person, and a way that it isn't in the movies, right? Not that you can't do it, but just know that it is much louder on the page than it would ever be in any of these other situation. And that was super helpful for me to think about, not that I can't swear, but that this is going to stand out in ways that maybe I didn't intend, right? And so I'm going to save it for only those situations where it is the most vital to the story, the most communicative of what I'm trying to say. So, so yeah, I mean, it's sort of a balance between what am I trying to say and how important is it that I say this particular thing. So.
Thank you. Kat, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I think they covered pretty much everything that I would have said myself. Luckily, I've been very lucky with my books and haven't received any pushback that I know of toward my books. I'm sure could be books that have not been stocked for various reasons, but authors don't always hear about it. And as far as the cussing in books go, that is something that I am definitely aware of, especially since I write young adult fiction and adult fiction. I do feel like I can get away with the F-bomb a lot more in my adult fiction. Although, like I said, in the past, I was told to be very gentle with adult readers. So there are some subject matters I feel like I can go a little further with in YA fiction than adult fiction, because I have been told that there are very strict rules, especially with my historical novels. They really want to try to market them to more of the historical romance crowd. So that's been interesting, that eye-opening to me to see that sometimes you can go further in the books for teens. When I first started writing In the Shadow of Blackbirds, I was at a writers conference. I think it was an SCBWI conference, and I asked an editor who I had a meeting with. I said, "How dark can I go with this book since I'm writing for teens?" And she said, "Go as dark as you want, and we can always pull you back, but just go, because what you think is dark is probably not going to be dark enough for a lot of the readers who are wanting dark fiction." So that was interesting. And that's, I forgot which one of you brought it up, but having an editor there is also extremely helpful, because they usually are aware of how far you can go and what will be problematic. And sometimes it's hard to tell what parents are going to decide is problematic or not. And a lot of that has to do with books by marginalized authors. I think run into the biggest problems, because there's still so many barriers out there to get diverse titles into libraries. So I think part of why I haven't run into too much problems is because I have the privilege of being a white author who isn't challenged as much.
Well, thank you everyone so much. This has been a really great panel. I was worried we wouldn't have enough time to fill, but by golly, it's after 7:30 and we're still going. So thank you. Thank you,
everyone. This has been fantastic. Thank you, Paige, for putting this together. Mary, thank you so much for facilitating. Great job on that. Kimberly, thanks for sharing it about your project. Matthew, thank you for reading. Sydney, Kat, Amber, and Roseanne, really, really great information. I really enjoyed it. We'll be posting this on our website, the video, within a week or so, maybe, Paige. Fantastic stuff, though. Really insightful, and appreciate you very much being here. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining us. And check out our YouTube page for all of our wonderful, fun, free events. We have lots of content on there that you'll want to see. All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Have a good night.